You mentioned about the importance of having a code of conduct, especially in South China Sea. What do you think is something that we haven't heard of anything after last year? And what is the U.S. role as far as reaching a consensus on code of conduct? And do you think resolving conflict can be achieved without a code of conduct?
Well, I think that to your first question, or to the second part of your question, there are international laws, there's international norms, there's international rules of the road of the way ships operate at sea. So there are things out there that define how to allow forces and ships and maritime things to operate, which is primarily we're talking about the maritime domain, particularly in the South China Sea. So some of those do exist. But the complexity of the issues in the South China Sea, when it comes to territorial issues. Now, let me restate again, the U.S. does not take sides on territorial issues anywhere in the world. We just don't. We just expect the territorial issues to be resolved peacefully, to be resolved through international norms and laws without coercion, and that in the end, that's the only way forward. So to the degree that where you have a very complex scenario in the South China Sea, where you look at all the overlapping claims, and there's many overlapping claims, not just between the Chinese and people in other countries. There's many overlapping claims. So as you look at those, it is my opinion that to get through that, to allow the young officers and law enforcement officers who are having to execute national policy in the South China Sea, that having a code of conduct that would allow them to understand the boundaries of what they could do when it comes to behavior is in the best interest of a peaceful solution. And what can the U.S. do about it? The U.S. can support it. The U.S. can support the dialogue. It can support as regional institutions such as ASEAN go forward and have dialogue with their neighbors such as China. We can support the need for these code of conducts and say it's really in the best interest. And hopefully these are all smart nations with good smart leadership.
Maybe I thought before we need to to the question just now. There's still a lot of these fears in the neighborhood that things can erupt because whether it's because of big forces in the waters, any small spark is enough to create any kind of tension. You have been in the waters for a pretty long time, and what is your perception of the current scenario?
In the South China Sea? Well, my perception is that there is tension. And there's tension because of friction over the way that the complexity of the way you decide or the way countries decide how their national interests are defined in this particular region. But I don't think that it is, I don't lay awake at night and worry about a significant event here. I believe that the countries involved all understand what's at stake. They all understand that this could be a long process. And they all understand that restraint and that peace is really the only way. But we continue to monitor it very carefully. I continue to monitor it to help understand what's going on. And that's really, as I said, the U.S. position is we don't take sides on these, but we do expect them to be accomplished peacefully. Would I rule out an incident at sea at some point in time? No, we have incidents at sea routinely. The question is are we strategically enough as a region, strategically thinking enough to be able to get beyond those incidents and to stay forward in a peaceful way that leads to continued peace and prosperity in this region? Because there's a lot at stake if we don't get this right.
Question on South China Sea. We see no progress on the code of conduct, but we see China becoming more aggressive in the area, sending its ships to certain disputed islands. And we have Philippines bringing them to the UN for arbitration. So, do you see any way forward apart from the code of conduct? I mean, any sort of a short or medium-term measure that can be taken before to move forward?
Yeah. Well, I think, first of all, we would oppose the change to the status quo by force by anybody. And so we need to retain the status quo until we can get to, or until a code of conduct or a solution by the party nations can be peacefully decided. So there will be a way forward. I mean, we will go forward. And I think that when you look at this in the strategic context, it is important. I know it's important to all these nations. There are issues of sovereignty, issues of resources, but in the end, there will have to be compromise. And so the question is, can you get to a position in your dialogue where there's effective compromise, and where on the other side of the compromise that all of the parties that involved felt like they got that they were treated fairly.